The record is clear on the suffering of black and brown and the Native Americans and oppressed people in this nation. But one of the things that the American people are not aware of, they are not aware of America's foreign policy. Did you know that since the inception of this nation, there are presidential records that record the doings of every president? Some of it is secret and some of it is open, but everything is recorded. When the Congress was set up, everything that they said and did, every law that was made, every amendment to the Constitution that was drafted, all of it is in a record. The doings of the Supreme Court are recorded. The doings of each committee that is a part of government, and above all, each department of government has its own record. So today, in this broadcast, we want to open up the record of the atrocious foreign policies of our government. Now, beloved brothers and sisters, foreign policy is something that the American people know very little about. When foreign governments come, especially after 9/11, Middle Eastern countries came and donated money. And one Islamic leader came and donated $10 million to the city of New York. But he said in his donation that he hoped that America would change her foreign policy. Mayor Giuliani sent back to him his $10 million, but all over the earth, wherever I have traveled, wherever people dislike America, it's not the American people necessarily that the people of the earth are angry with or burdened by. It is the foreign policy of the government of the United States. So, a lot of enemies that America makes, they make them for the American people. So the American people would like to know, why is it that we are hated in the world? Because America's view of herself is that we are a good nation. And by and large, if the people knew better, most of them would do better. But at the top of things, you have a satanic, demonic mind that is the architect of America's foreign policy. This foreign policy has objectives, and this foreign policy has national interests. But the American people don't know necessarily what those interests are, and they don't necessarily know what the foreign policy objective of their government is toward the nations and people of the earth. Now, how you treat the ethnic groups, the racial groups within America, is how you will treat those that come from other nations to be made Americans. So if our government does not have a good domestic policy toward Mexican people, how will they have a good policy toward the Mexican nation? If they don't have a good domestic policy toward Cubans or Haitians or Guatemalans or Hondurans or Jamaicans or Barbadians or Africans in America and in the diaspora, How could America's policies be good for them if they're not good for those who live within the borders of what is called the United States of America? The Chinese, the Koreans, all of those from Southeast Asia, even Europeans have tasted of the meddling of America in the affairs of their nations. So without further delay, I would like to read to you a partial list of the United States covert actions abroad to impose or restore favorable political conditions from 1946 to 1983. This list was prepared by Tom Gervasi of the Center for Military Research and Analysis in 1984, and it was compiled using information available in the public domain. We will also quote from a 1984 edition of Harper's Magazine. It starts in 1946 in Greece. Now, Greece, as you know, is in Europe. The Americans wanted to restore the monarch after the overthrow of the Metaxas government. And through the efforts of our government, our CIA or those clandestine organizations of the country, the monarch was restored. From 1946 to 1955 in West Germany, an average of $6 million annually was sent to support former Nazi intelligence network of General Reinhard Gehlen, and this was considered successful. From 1948 to 1968 in Italy, an average of $30 million annually in payments to political and labor leaders to support anti-communist candidates in Italian elections, and that was considered successful. Again, in 1949, Greece, military assistance to anti-communist forces in the Greek Civil War. And from America's vantage point, it was successful. Now we're all in Europe. In the Ukraine, to organize and support a Ukrainian resistance movement, which was unsuccessful. In 1949 to 1961, in Burma, in Southeast Asia, support 12,000 nationalist Chinese troops in Burma under General Lai Mi as an incursion force into the People's Republic of China, meddling in the internal affairs of others, but this was considered unsuccessful. Back to Europe, Poland, financial and military assistance for Polish freedom and independence movement, unsuccessful. In 1950, in Albania, in Europe, the overthrow of government Enver Hoxha, unsuccessful. In 1951 to 1954 in China, airdropped guerrilla teams into the People's Republic of China, unsuccessful. In 1953 in Iran, the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh and his government to install Shah Zahedi cost $10 million, successful. In the Philippines, assassination and propaganda campaign to overcome the Huk resistance and install the government of Ramon Magsaysay. It was successful. In Costa Rica, to overthrow the government of Jose Figueres, unsuccessful. In South Vietnam, America installed the government of Ngo Dinh Diem. It was successful. In 1954, in West Germany, America arranged the abduction and discreditation of West German intelligence chief Otto John and replaced him with Reinhard Gehlen, and that was successful. In Guatemala, in Central America, America overthrew the government of Jacobo Arbenz Guzman and replaced him with Carlos Castilla Armas. Successful. Intervention, meddling in the affairs of other nations. In China, they were trying to assassinate Zhou Enlai en route to the Bandung Conference in 1955, and that was unsuccessful. In 1956, in Hungary, in Europe, financial and military assistance to organize and support a Hungarian resistance movement and a broad propaganda campaign to encourage it. It was unsuccessful. In 1956 in Cuba, they wanted to establish an anti-communist police force, Bureau de Represión Actividades Comunistas, under the Batista regime. And under Batista, it was successful. In Syria, they wanted to overthrow the Ghazi government aborted by the Israeli invasion of Egypt. 1956 and 1957 in Jordan in the Middle East, an average of $750,000 annually in personal payments to King Hussein. According to the United States government, payments ceased when this was disclosed in 1976. In Lebanon, in 1957, Lebanon is in the Middle East. Financial assistance for the election of a pro-American candidate to the Lebanese parliament. It was successful. In 1958, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, financial and military assistance, including B-26 bombers for rebel forces attempting to overthrow the Sukarno government, but it was unsuccessful, but it didn't stop them from continuing to try. In Cambodia, our government assassinated Prince Norodom Sihanouk. It was unsuccessful, but they attempted his assassination. In Guatemala, military assistance, including the use again of B-26 bombers for the government of Miguel Ydigoras Fuentes to defeat the rebel forces, successful. In Angola, now we're going to Africa, financial and military assistance to the rebel forces of Olden Ruberto. It's inconclusive how that turned out. But in Laos, in Southeast Asia again, military assistance including 400 United States Special Forces troops to deny the plain of Ja's Bad Mekong Basin to the Pathet Lao. Inconclusive. 1961 to 1965 in Laos, an average of $300 million was spent annually to recruit and maintain l'armée clandestine of 35,000 Hmong and Miao tribesmen and 17,000 Thai mercenaries in support of the government of Phumi Nosavan to resist the Pathet Lao. It was successful. In Cuba, from 1961 to 1963, our government attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro, and there were 6 attempts from 61 to 63. All of them were unsuccessful. In 1961, Cuba America trained and supported the invasion force of Cuban exiles to overthrow the Castro government and assist their invasion at the Bay of Pigs at a cost of $62 million taxpayer dollars, unsuccessful. In Ecuador, in South America, overthrow the government of Jose Velasco Ibarra. It was successful. In the Congo, precipitate the conditions leading to the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Successful. In the Dominican Republic, precipitate conditions leading to the assassination of Rafael Trujillo. Successful. In 1961 to 1966, Cuba, broad sabotage program, including terrorist attacks. Listen to the language. Terrorist attacks on the American side on coastal targets and bacteriological warfare in order to weaken the Castro government, but that was unsuccessful. In 1962, in Thailand, a brigade of 5,000 United States Marines to resist the threat to Thai government from the Pathet Lao. Successful. 1962 to 1964, in British Guyana, in South America, organized labor strikes and riots to overthrow the government of Chedi Jagan. Successful. In 1962 to 1964, in South America, in the government and nation of Brazil, America organized campaigns of labor strikes and propaganda to overthrow the government of Raul Goulart. Successful. Dominican Republic, to overthrow the government of Juan Bosch in a military coup. Successful. In South Vietnam, precipitate conditions leading to the assassination of Ngo Dinh Diem. Successful. In Ecuador, South America, overthrow the government of Carlos Julio Arasamena. Successful. In El Salvador, in Central America, organize Orden and Ancestral, domestic intelligence networks under the direction of General Jose Alberto Medrano and Colonel Nicolas Carranza, and provide intelligence support and training in surveillance, interrogation, and assassination techniques. This is all from our government in foreign policy objectives. Let me continue. In Iraq, financial and military assistance for the Freedom Party of Mullah Mustafa al-Barzani in an effort to establish an independent Kurdistan. It was unsuccessful. They wanted to divide Iraq and separate the Kurds from the Sunni and the Shiite. Now think about wanting to separate. And we are asking our government as what must be done by you to separate us into a state or territory of our own, because you know you have no future for us but back to your foreign policy. In Chile, $20 million in assistance for Eduardo Frei to defeat Salvador Allende in the Chilean elections. America was successful. In Brazil, Guatemala, Uruguay, and the Dominican Republic, provide training. What kind of training? In assassination, in interrogation techniques for police and intelligence personnel. Inconclusive. In the Congo, in Africa, financial and military assistance, including B-26 and T-28 aircraft, and American and exiled Cuban pilots for Joseph Mobutu and Cyril Adula, and later for Moise Tshombe in Katanga province to defeat rebel forces loyal to Lumumba. America was successful. In 1964 to 1967, South Vietnam, Phoenix program to eliminate Viet Cong political infrastructure through more than 20,000 assassinations. Now, I did not write this. This is written by experts who have the files of America's covert actions. Don't turn away from your television. You, the American people, must listen and look, because if you don't, you will be deceived into thinking that America's foreign policy objectives are moral, are ethical. They are anything but that. Let's continue. In North Vietnam, sabotage and ambush missions under Operation Plan 34A by United States Special Forces and Nung tribesmen. It's inconclusive. In Laos, under Operation Shining Brass and Prairie Fire, sabotage and ambush missions by the United States Special Forces personnel and Nung and Male tribesmen under General Bang Pao. Now think about this. America sending our special forces troops in other nations to assassinate, to sabotage, to ambush people and missions. This is meddling, creating mischief, and causing the shedding of blood. In Thailand, they recruited 17,000 mercenaries to support Laotian government of Phumi Nosavan resisting the Pathet Lao. Successful. In Peru, America's money, taxpayer dollars, provided training in assassination and interrogation techniques for Peruvian police and intelligence personnel, similar to the training given in Uruguay, Brazil, and the Dominican Republic in an effort to defeat the resistance movement. This was unsuccessful. In Indonesia, to organize a campaign of propaganda to overthrow the Sukarno government and precipitate conditions leading to the massacre of more than 500,000 members of Indonesian Communist Party in order to eliminate opposition to the new Suharto government imposed on Indonesia by the United States of America. In 1967, in Bolivia, in South America, our government assisted that government in the capture of Ernesto Che Guevara, and they were successful. And as you know, Che Guevara was assassinated in Bolivia. In Greece, the overthrow of the government of George Papandreou and install a military government of Colonel George Papadopoulos after the abdication of King Constantine. Successful. But is it meddling? Is it interfering in the internal affairs of others? What is the purpose of such a foreign policy? Keep tuning in. It'll come on in the next 5 minutes. Cambodia, under projects Daniel Boone and Salem House, sabotage and ambush mission by the United States Special Forces personnel, inconclusive. In Cambodia, a bombing campaign to crush Viet Cong sanctuaries in Cambodia, unsuccessful, unknown by the American people. In Cambodia, overthrow the government of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, successful. In Chile, South America, campaign of assassinations, propaganda, labor strikes, and demonstrations to overthrow the government of Salvador Allende with a cost of 8,400,000 American taxpayer dollars, and this was successful. In Afghanistan, military and financial assistance to the government of Mohammed Duad to resist the rise to power of Nur Muhammad Taraki, unsuccessful. In Portugal, in Europe, the overthrow of the government of General Vasco dos Santos Gonçalves, successful. In Angola, the military assistance to forces of Olden Roberto and Jonas Savimbi to defeat the forces of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola during the Angola Civil War, and to prevent the MPLA from forming a new government, and America was unsuccessful. In Australia, propaganda and political pressure to force the dissolution of a Labour government of Gough Whitlam, it was successful. In Jamaica, in the Caribbean, a military coup to overthrow the government of Michael Manley, unsuccessful. In 1984, in Angola, financial and military assistance to the forces of Jonas Savimbi to harass and destabilize Neto and succeeding governments, inconclusive. In Iran, install a military government to replace the Shah and resist the growth of Muslim fundamentalism, unsuccessful. In Jamaica, again in the Caribbean, financial pressure to destabilize the government of Michael Manley and campaign propaganda and demonstrations to defeat his government in elections, and it was successful. We're coming to the end, but this is just not all of the covert operations, just a small amount of them. In Afghanistan in 1979, military aid to rebel forces of Zia Nezri, Zia Khan Nasri, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Syed Ahmed Gailani, and conservative mullahs to overthrow the government of Hafizullah Amin, aborted by the Soviet intervention and the installation of a new government. From 1980 to 1984 in Afghanistan, continuing military aid to same rebel groups to harass the Soviet occupation forces and challenge the legitimacy of the government of Babrak Kemal. I must tell you that this led to the Soviet Union's ultimate collapse and the rise of Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen that were financed and given intelligence by the America's CIA. Well, let's go on. In the Seychelles, off the coast of Africa, to destabilize the government of France Albert René, successful. In Grenada, a mercenary coup to overthrow the government of Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, successful. In Dominica, financial support to the Freedom Party of Eugenia Charles to defeat Oliver Seraphim in Dominican elections, successful. And because America aided Eugenia Charles under the Reagan administration, he could use Eugenia Charles to open the door for Reagan to send his troops into Grenada to overthrow the government of Maurice Bishop and cause his assassination. In Mauritius, financial support for Siwusaga Ramgulam to bring him to power in the 1982 elections, unsuccessful. In Libya, broad campaign of economic pressure, propaganda, military maneuvers in Egypt, Sudan, and the Gulf of Sidra or Sirte, and organization of Libyan Liberation Front exiles to destabilize the government of Muammar Gaddafi. It was inconclusive. In Chad, in Africa, military assistance to Hissène Habré to overthrow the government of Gukuni Udeki. Successful. In Guatemala, a military coup to overthrow the government of Ángel Aníbal Guevara. Successful. In Bolivia, a military coup to overthrow the government of Celso Torrelia. Successful. In Jordan, military assistance to equip and train 2 Jordanian brigades as an Arab strike force to implement United States policy objectives without Israeli assistance. In Suriname, in South America, overthrow the government of Colonel Desi Bouterse. 3 attempts in this period unsuccessful. In El Salvador, 1.4 million in financial support for the presidential election campaign of Jose Napoleon Duarte, successful. So, my beloved brothers and sisters, this continues. You can see from this that our government has been involved in foreign policy objectives to preserve and protect national interests. Well, let me go immediately to national interests. I'd like to start with the words of Mr. Perkins, who admitted that he was a member, that he called himself a part of the economic hitman. From the book by John Perkins called Hoodwinked, an American hitman reveals why the world financial markets imploded and what we need to do to remake them. These are quotes from Mr. Perkins. He quotes, "I was an economic hitman, part of an elite corps of modern-day hired guns who promote the interests of big corporations and certain sectors of the United States government. Although we, economic hitmen, work in many ways, our most common task is to identify countries with resources our corporations covet." Remember the 10 commandments of Moses, the last of the 10. Do not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's ox, your neighbor's donkey, anything that belongs to your neighbor, do not covet. But here, our government covets or desires the resources from other nations, and these economic hitmen are sent to identify countries with resources that American corporations covet. Then, he says, we seduce, bribe, and extort their leaders into exploiting their own people, accepting loans the countries can never repay, privatizing their national assets, legalizing the destruction of fragile environments, and finally selling those coveted resources to our corporations at bargain prices. And when the leaders resist, they are overthrown or assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals. And a jackal is in the wolf or dog family. And these are human beings that feed on carrion or feed on dead things, or these hitmen feed on weak nations. Again, Mr. Perkins, in the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, said, "My job is to encourage world leaders to become part of a vast network that promotes U.S. commercial interests. In the end, those leaders become ensnared in a web of debt that ensures their loyalty. We can draw on them whenever we desire to satisfy our political, economic, or military needs. If an economic hitman is completely successful, the loans are so large that the debtor or the recipient country is forced to default on its payments after a few years. And when this happens, then, like the mafia, we demand our pound of flesh. This often includes one or more of the following: control over United Nations votes. 2, the installation of military bases or access to precious resources such as oil or the Panama Canal. Of course, the debtor still owes us the money, and another country is added to our global empire. I want to close with this serpent that deceived the whole world. And when you see the picture on the screen, the serpent's head is America, but its tail is curled around the nations of the earth, as you have heard today. So when the great Mahdi, Master Farad Muhammad, came to North America by himself and introduced himself to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he said that the number one enemy that he would destroy is this one, the modern Babylon, that mystery Babylon that has become the habitation of devils. That great Mahdi, or the Lord himself, Jesus the Christ, anointed with power to crush the wicked, is now curtailing the power of America in the present, in the world, economically and politically.